The lecture hall buzzed with the typical restless energy of third-year students at the Galactic Military Academy on Kepler Station. Commander Zeth Crane stood at the holographic display, his blue-scale reptilian features impassive, as he prepared to deliver what he considered the most important lesson of the semester. "Settle down, cadets," Zeth commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had witnessed 3 major galactic conflicts. The room fell silent. Today we discuss the Third Terran War, the final chapter in humanity's brief and ultimately futile attempt at galactic dominance. A few snickers rippled through the predominantly alien student body. Near the back, Cadet Mira Chen sat perfectly still, her dark eyes fixed on the instructor. She was the only human in the class of 42 students, a fact that hadn't gone unnoticed by anyone. The war began in 2387, Zeth continued, manipulating the hologram to show a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red dots marked human colonies, while blue indicated the Allied Galactic Coalition. Humanity, in their typical arrogance, believed they could challenge an alliance of 14 species. They were incorrect. More chuckles. Mira's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The humans deployed their entire fleet, Zeth said with what could only be described as satisfaction. 2,000 ships, their most advanced technology, their best commanders. Admiral Kane led their forces personally. They called it Operation Last Stand. How fitting. Cadet Vex, a tall crystalline being whose body sparkled under the lecture hall lights, raised his hand. "Professor, wasn't humanity known for being particularly stubborn in warfare?" "Indeed," Zeth nodded approvingly. They refused 3 separate offers of conditional surrender. They fought with what they called human spirit, whatever that means. In the end, it accomplished nothing. The coalition forces, led by Fleet Admiral Kane of the Nexian Empire, systematically dismantled every human defensive position. The hologram shifted to show battle formations, red dots being steadily consumed by expanding blue circles. The final engagement occurred at the Centauri system, Zeth explained. Admiral Kane's flagship, the Earth's Defiance, was cornered along with the last remnants of humanity's naval power. The battle lasted 18 hours. When it ended, humanity's military might was broken forever. Cadet Talia, whose 6 arms made taking notes remarkably efficient, spoke up. "What happened to Admiral Kane?" "Killed in action when her ship's reactor went critical," Zeth replied matter-of-factly. Along with her, humanity's dreams of galactic expansion died. The war officially ended with Earth's unconditional surrender. Humanity accepted client species status under coalition oversight. They've remained cooperative ever since. Mira's pencil snapped in her grip. The sharp crack echoed through the silent hall, drawing every eye to her. She stared down at the broken pieces for a moment, then slowly raised her hand. "Yes, Cadet Chen?" Zeth's tone carried a note of wariness. Mira had been quiet all semester, but her academic performance was exemplary. "Professor, have you read the complete historical record of that battle?" Zeth's scale brow furrowed. "Of course. The Coalition archives contain extensive documentation of humanity's defeat." Mira stood slowly, her movement deliberate and controlled. "All of it, including the final reports filed after the ceasefire. I failed to see the relevance of," Zeth began. "Because if you had," Mira interrupted, her voice carrying a dangerous edge, "you'd know that Admiral Kane wasn't killed when the Earth's Defiance suffered reactor failure. She triggered it intentionally, as a signal." The room had gone dead quiet. Even the normal hum of the station's life support systems seemed muted. "Cadet Chun, you will return to your seat immediately," Zeth commanded, his authority mask slipping to reveal genuine anger. "A signal," Mira continued as if she hadn't heard him, "to the hidden human fleet that had been waiting in the Orc cloud for 3 weeks. 2,000 ships visible to coalition sensors. 4,000 ships invisible to them, using experimental stealth technology that wouldn't be declassified for another 50 years. Vex made a sound like crystal chimes in a windstorm. "That's impossible. The Coalition detected no additional human forces." Mira turned to face him, and her smile was sharp enough to cut. "That was rather the point, wasn't it? You can't detect what you don't know to look for." "This is preposterous," Zeth sputtered. The historical record clearly states. The historical record, Mira said, her voice rising, clearly states that Admiral Kane died in an explosion. It clearly states that humanity surrendered unconditionally. It clearly states that the war ended with coalition victory, all of which is technically true. She paused, letting the word technically hang in the air like a blade. What the readily available historical record doesn't mention, she continued, is that the explosion of the Earth's Defiance was a predetermined signal for Phase 2 of Operation Last Stand. What it doesn't mention is that humanity's unconditional surrender came with very specific conditions that weren't made public. What it doesn't mention is that the war didn't end with coalition victory. It ended with coalition capitulation disguised as human surrender. The silence was deafening. Zeth's blue scales had darkened to almost black. "You're claiming," Talia whispered, "that humanity won that war?" "I'm not claiming anything," Mira replied calmly. "I'm stating documented fact. When Admiral Kane's ship exploded, 4,000 human vessels decloaked simultaneously. Not around Centauri. Around every single coalition homeworld. The blood drained from what faces were capable of it. Others went very, very still. The message was simple." Mira continued conversationally. Humanity would accept client species status and regular coalition oversight. Humanity would limit its military to purely defensive forces. Humanity would cease all expansion beyond current territories. In exchange, coalition world would continue existing. "This is madness," Zeth breathed. "This is chess," Mira corrected. "And if you bother to read past the public summary, Professor, you'd know that every single one of those stealth ships carried enough antimatter to crack a planet's crust. You'd know that the surrender ceremony wasn't humanity bowing to coalition might. It was a coalition accepting humanity's terms while saving face." Cadet Jorn, whose rock-like features rarely showed emotion, managed to look stunned. Why would humanity agree to such restrictions if they held all the cards? "Because," Mira said softly, "humanity didn't want to rule the galaxy. We just wanted to make sure no one could rule us." The client species status was protective camouflage. The military restrictions kept other species from feeling threatened. The territorial limits ensured we wouldn't accidentally start another arms race. She looked around the room, meeting each student's gaze in turn. For the last 2 centuries, everyone's been congratulating themselves on keeping humanity under control. Meanwhile, human colonies have been quietly spreading through unmapped systems. Human technology has been advancing at rates that would terrify you if you knew the actual numbers. And the human fleet, she smiled again, that same dangerous expression. "Well, let's just say those 4,000 ships were just the ones we let you know about." Zeth had gone from blue to almost purple. "These are lies. Fantasy. Anti-coalition propaganda." "Are they?" Mira asked mildly. She pulled out her personal datapad and tossed it onto his desk. "Data Core Access Code 7-7 Alpha Tango 9. Full military clearance. Check the classified files, Professor. All of them. Pay special attention to the folder labeled Post-War Demographic Analysis." Zeth stared at the datapad as if it were a live explosive, which, considering what Mira was implying, it might as well have been. "You see," Mira continued, settling back into her chair with elaborate casualness, "my grandmother was Admiral Sarah Kane. My mother is Admiral Victoria Kane, current head of Human Colonial Defense. And me? Well, I'm just a cadet trying to get through military academy." The silence stretched on for nearly a full minute before Vex found his voice. "Why tell us this? Why reveal whatever this is?" Myra's expression softened slightly. "Because you're my classmates. Because I like most of you. Because in about 6 months, we're all going to graduate and potentially serve together. And because..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Because the Coalition is about to make a very stupid decision regarding human territorial restrictions. And when they do, I want you to understand that what happens next isn't humanity being aggressive. It's humanity being tired pretending to be weak." "What kind of decision?" Talia asked, though she looked like she already regretted the question. "The kind that forgets the lessons of the Third Terran War," Mira replied. The kind that mistakes restraint for inability. The kind that assumes humanity's military limitations are real rather than voluntary. She stood again, gathering her belongings with deliberate calm. Professor Zeth, I recommend reading those files tonight. All of them. Pay particular attention to the section on human fleet disposition and the classified addendum to the surrender treaty. And when you do... She paused at the door, looking back over her shoulder. Remember that everything I just told you was common knowledge to human 5-year-olds. The door slid shut behind her with a soft hiss, leaving behind a lecture hall full of students who were beginning to realize that everything they thought they knew about galactic history was about to change. Zeth stared at the datapad for a long moment, then reached for it with trembling hands. The device activated at his touch, displaying a simple menu. His eyes found the folder Mira had mentioned, and his finger hovered over it. Outside the station's viewports, the stars looked the same as they always had. But somehow, they seemed infinitely less friendly than they had an hour ago. Part 2, when the mask finally falls. 3 days after Mira's revelation in the lecture hall, Commander Zeth Crane sat in his quarters staring at a glass of Nexian whiskey that had gone untouched for the past hour. The classified files had painted a picture so disturbing that he'd barely slept since accessing them. Everything Mira Chen had said was true, every single word. The human population hadn't remained stable at 12 billion, as publicly reported. It had grown to over 40 billion, spread across colonies that didn't officially exist. Human technology hadn't stagnated under coalition oversight. It had advanced exponentially, with developments that made current coalition military assets look like stone tools. And the human fleet. Zeth shuddered. The human fleet numbered in the hundreds of thousands of vessels, most of them invisible to standard sensors, and armed with weapons that could sterilize entire star systems. His comm unit chimed, displaying an urgent message from Academy Command. All instructors were to report immediately for an emergency briefing. Zeth downed the whiskey in one burning gulp and headed for the door. The main briefing amphitheater was packed with every instructor and senior staff member on the station. Admiral Kane, the Academy's Nexian commander, stood at the central podium looking like death itself. His usually pristine uniform was wrinkled, his 4 eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings, Kane began without preamble. I've just received word from Coalition High Command. 3 hours ago, the Coalition Senate voted unanimously to implement Resolution 447. A murmur of confusion rippled through the assembled faculty. Zeth felt his stomach drop, even though he didn't know what Resolution 447 entailed. For those unfamiliar, Kane continued grimly. Resolution 447 authorizes the immediate seizure of all human colonies beyond the Sol system. It declares humanity in violation of the Territorial Restriction Clause of the Surrender Treaty. Human populations are to be relocated to designated worlds under direct coalition administration. The murmur became a roar. Zeth found himself on his feet, along with half the amphitheater, shouting questions and protests. Kane raised his hands for silence. The resolution passed because our intelligence services reported the existence of illegal human settlements. The Senate decided that humanity had been testing boundaries for too long. Kane's voice carried the weight of someone delivering a death sentence. The operation begins in 72 hours. Professor Delana, a graceful ethereal whose species prized wisdom above all else, stood slowly. Admiral, has anyone consulted the humans about this decision? The humans will be informed when the operation commences, Kane replied. This is not a negotiation. Then we're all dead, said a quiet voice from the back of the amphitheater. Every head turned to see Mira Chen standing in the entrance, still wearing her cadet uniform, but carried herself like she'd aged decades in the past 3 days. She walked down the center aisle with measured steps, her expression unreadable. Cadet Chen, Kane snapped. This is a faculty meeting. You have no authorization to... Admiral, Mira interrupted politely. With respect, I have authorization you can't even imagine. She reached the front of the amphitheater and turned to face the assembled instructors. May I address the room? Absolutely not, Kane growled. Admiral Kane, Mira said calmly. Please access your command console and enter authorization code Omega-77 Black Swan. Chorus looked ready to refuse, but something in Mira's tone made him hesitate. He turned to his console and entered the code. His face went ashen as the display changed. "What does it say, Admiral?" Mira asked conversationally. Chorus's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Full diplomatic immunity. Coalition military rank. Admiral. Species designation. Human Colonial Defense Force." He looked up at her with something approaching terror. "You're not a cadet." "Oh, I am a cadet," Mira corrected with a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. "I'm also Admiral Mira Kane, Operational Commander of the Terran Shadow Fleet. I've been attending your academy for the past year as part of a cultural exchange program, learning how our neighbors think, understanding their military doctrine, making friends." She turned to address the stunned faculty directly. 3 days ago, I tried to warn this institution about the consequences of underestimating humanity. I provided Professor Zeth with access to historical records that clearly demonstrated the true nature of the Third Terran War. I hope that academic integrity might prevent the catastrophic decision your Senate has just made. "You knew," Professor Delana breathed. "You knew they were planning this." "I knew it was a possibility," Mira confirmed. "Human intelligence services are quite thorough. We've been monitoring coalition communications for decades. When preliminary discussions about Resolution 447 began 6 months ago, we initiated contingency protocols." Admiral Chorus found his voice. "What kind of contingency protocols?" Mira's expression didn't change, but somehow the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The kind that ensure humanity never has to pretend to be weak again. She activated her personal datapad, and suddenly the amphitheater's main display came alive with tactical readouts. Star charts filled with moving dots, fleet positions, weapon deployments. The scale was staggering. "As of this moment," Mira announced, "the Human Colonial Defense Force is transitioning from concealment to active operations. Every coalition world, every military installation, every strategic asset is currently targeted by human vessels you cannot detect, carrying weapons you cannot defend against." Cadet Vex, who had somehow found his way into the briefing, made that crystal wind chime sound again. "How many ships?" "Currently deployed? 800,000. Mira replied as if discussing the weather. "Ready for deployment within the next 12 hours? Another 2 million. We've had 2 centuries to prepare for this moment." The silence was absolute. Even the station's background noise seemed muted. "But here's the thing," Mira continued, her tone becoming almost conversational. "Humanity doesn't want a war. We never wanted a war. We want to be left alone to grow and explore and build our civilization in peace. The surrender treaty gave us that opportunity, and we've honored it faithfully for 200 years. She gestured to the tactical display, where coalition fleets appeared as tiny specks surrounded by vast clouds of human vessels. "However," she said, and now steel entered her voice, "the moment your military forces move against our colonies, the moment coalition ships cross into human space with hostile intent, every single one of those 800,000 vessels will open fire simultaneously. Not on military targets. On everything." Professor Zeth spoke up, his voice hoarse. "You're threatening genocide." "I'm explaining consequences," Mira corrected coldly. "Humanity learned a valuable lesson from the Third Terran War. We learned that sometimes the only way to ensure peace is to make war so absolutely catastrophic that no rational being would ever consider starting one." Admiral Chorus was staring at the tactical display with growing horror. "The Senate doesn't know. They think humanity is still restricted to a few dozen colonies and a handful of defensive vessels." "The Senate," Mira said with bitter amusement, "thinks a lot of things that aren't true. They think the surrender treaty was their victory. They think humanity accepted client species status out of defeat rather than strategy. They think the territorial restrictions were limits imposed on us rather than boundaries we impose on ourselves." She walked to the center of the amphitheater, addressing the entire room. "For 2 centuries, humanity has been playing a game. We let you believe you won. We let you feel safe. We let you make policies and pass resolutions and feel important. All we asked in return was to be left alone. Your Senate has decided that our peaceful compliance was weakness rather than choice. The tactical display shifted, showing deployment patterns around coalition worlds. In approximately 68 hours, Mira continued, coalition forces will begin moving toward human colonies. They will encounter defensive positions that will make the Third Terran War look like a training exercise. They will face weapons that can crack moons and shields that can absorb solar flares. They will discover that every defeat humanity has accepted, every limitation we've endured, every restriction we've lived under was voluntary. Cadet Talia raised one of her 6 hands tentatively. What do you want from us? Mira's expression softened slightly. I want you to understand. When the news reports start coming in, when your government starts screaming about human aggression and unprovoked attacks, I want you to remember this conversation. I want you to remember that humanity tried to warn you. We tried to maintain the peace. She looked directly at Zeth. Professor, you have access to the real historical records now. When this is over, when the shooting stops and the treaties are renegotiated, I want you to teach the truth, all of it. And if the coalition surrenders? Professor Delana asked quietly. Then we go back to playing the game, Mira replied. Humanity will accept whatever face-saving terms the coalition needs to maintain their dignity. We'll sign new treaties with even stricter limitations. We'll pretend to be constrained and controlled and grateful for your oversight. And your children and grandchildren will grow up thinking they're keeping humanity in check. She smiled, and for the first time since entering the amphitheater, it reached her eyes. Until the next time someone decides to test whether human restraint is real or voluntary. Admiral Kane stood slowly, his 4 eyes fixed on the tactical display. How do we stop this? You can't, Mira said simply. The resolution has passed. Coalition fleets are already moving. The moment they enter human space, 800,000 vessels will decloak and announce their presence by turning the first coalition ship they encounter into expanding plasma. She paused, checking her chronometer. However, you can minimize the damage. The coalition has approximately 67 hours and 43 minutes to recall their fleets and rescind Resolution 447. If they do that, humanity will consider this an unfortunate misunderstanding and return to our regularly scheduled pretense of weakness. And if they don't, Mira's smile turned sharp again. Then your children will grow up in a galaxy where humanity no longer pretends to be anything other than what we actually are. And Professor Zeth will have much more interesting material for his military history classes. She headed for the exit, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, she said without turning around, I genuinely enjoyed my time here. You're good people, most of you. I hope we can remain friends after this is all over. The door closed behind her with a soft hiss, leaving behind a room full of faculty members staring at tactical displays that showed their entire civilization balanced on the edge of annihilation. Outside the station's viewports, the stars looked exactly the same as always. But now everyone in the amphitheater knew the truth about what was hiding in the darkness between them, waiting with infinite patience for someone to make the wrong choice. The countdown had begun.